Trust is like a fine silk thread. It takes months to weave into something beautiful, but only a second of betrayal to unravel the entire garment. I've spent my life dressing the elite, hiding their flaws with perfect seams, never realizing that the biggest tear was in the fabric of my own home. My name is Vivian. At 54, I have reached the summit of the fashion world. My brand, Vespera Couture, is built on a foundation of absolute precision and timeless elegance. In the industry, I am known as the Eye, the uncanny ability to spot a single loose thread or a mismatched grain from across a crowded room. People pay tens of thousands of dollars for my designs because they know a Vivian original is flawless, both inside and out. But as I stood in the cold shadows of my own hallway on a rainy Thursday night, I realized how blind I had been to the rot festering in the heart of my own life. I had returned early from a grueling fabric sourcing trip to Italy. I was exhausted, but carried a sense of quiet excitement, clutching a small velvet-lined box containing a vintage 1950s watch I had found in a hidden boutique in Florence. It was a gift from my husband, Silas. We had been married for 25 years, a quarter century of shared dinners, business triumphs, and what I believed were quiet evenings of mutual respect. He was the pragmatic COO who managed the numbers, while I lived in the world of sketches and textures, or so the story went. The house was unnervingly quiet, yet a warm amber glow spilled from the slightly ajar door of Silas's private study. As I approached, expecting to find him hunched over a spreadsheet, I didn't hear the sound of business calls. Instead, I heard a melodic, youthful giggle that I knew all too well. It belonged to my younger sister, Ilara. Ilara is 20 years younger than me. When our parents died in a tragic accident decades ago, I became more than just a sister. I became her world. I put her through the finest schools, bought her a luxury penthouse for her 25th birthday, and created a prestigious head of PR position at Vespera just so she could be near me. I thought I was protecting her from the harshness of the world. I didn't realize I was feeding a serpent in a designer dress. I paused at the door, my hand freezing on the cold brass. The air in the hallway suddenly felt thin. "Silas, look at this," Ilara whispered, her voice dripping with a playfulness that felt like a jagged needle under my skin. "The transfer to the Singapore account is complete. That's another 2 million moved successfully. Vivian is so buried in her spring collection that she hasn't looked at the operational ledgers in months. She actually thinks the rising costs are just due to premium silk prices and global shipping delays." Silas laughed, a dry, cynical sound that I had never heard him use in my presence. "She's 54, Ilara. Her mind is always in the clouds, dreaming of lace and embroidery. She's reached her expiration date in this industry. She just doesn't know it yet. Let her have her little art project for now. By the time the winter gala rolls around, we'll have funneled enough to launch Ilara Gold Luxury and leave this aging house to its creditors." "And the divorce?" Ilara asked, her voice dropping to a seductive, chilling purr. "The papers are already drafted and hidden in the safe. The moment we secure the intellectual property rights for her signature patterns, I'll serve them. She'll be too broken and bankrupt to fight back. We'll have the brand name, the capital, and each other. She'll just be a memory of a bygone era." I stood there, the vintage watchbox trembling in my hand. The man I had loved for half my life and the girl I had raised like my own daughter were not just betraying my heart, they were planning to erase my entire existence. They saw my age not as a mark of wisdom, but a sign of decay. They mistook my grace for weakness and my focus for senility. I felt a surge of cold, crystalline fury wash over me. A younger, more impulsive woman might have burst into that room screaming and throwing the watch at them, but I am not that woman. I am a master tailor. I have spent decades learning that if you want to take a garment apart, you don't rip it. Ripping leaves a mess. If you want a clean break, you find the master thread, the one that holds the entire structure together, and you pull it gently 1 inch at a time until everything collapses. I stepped back into the shadows, my footsteps silenced by the thick Persian rug. I walked out of the house and into the pouring rain, getting back into my car. I sat there for a long time, watching the light in the study window. "You think I've lost my edge, Silas?" I whispered to the dark rain-streaked windshield. "You think I'm the fabric and you're the shears? You're about to learn that I am the one who designed the shears." I started the engine and drove to my private atelier. I didn't need sleep. I needed my private ledger. I needed my encryption codes. And most of all, I needed to start weaving a trap so beautiful and so intricate they wouldn't even realize they were inside it until the walls closed in. The game was no longer about fashion. It was about survival. And in my world, the designer always gets the final edit. The following morning, I sat at the head of the mahogany breakfast table, the silver service gleaming under the chandelier. When Silas walked in, adjusting his silk tie, a tie I had designed for him, I didn't see my husband. I saw a parasitic entity that had mistaken my hospitality for a weakness. When Alara joined us minutes later, wearing a robe I had bought her from a boutique in Milan, I didn't see my sister. I saw a flawed piece of work that needed to be discarded. "You look radiant this morning, Vivian," Silas said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I smelled the faint scent of his cologne, and for the first time in 25 years, it made my skin crawl. "Did you sleep well after your trip?" "Like a baby, Silas," I replied, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. In fact, I woke up with a burst of inspiration. I think it's time for Vespera Couture to move in a bold new direction. I've been holding on to the reins too tightly, and I realize now that I should be empowering the people I love. I saw them exchange a quick, sharp look. Greed is a powerful blinder. They didn't see the trap. They only saw an opening. "What kind of direction?" Alara asked, her eyes widening as she reached for the orange juice. "I want to launch a sub-brand called Ethelgard. It will be youthful, aggressive, and entirely separate from the main Vespera accounts. I want to give it a massive initial capital injection, $10 million to start. Alara, I want you to be the face of it. Silas, I want you to handle the offshore logistics and the intellectual property transfers. I want to see if you two can build a legacy of your own." I watched the hunger take hold of them. It was almost pathetic. By offering them Ethelgard, I wasn't giving them a gift. I was giving them a centralized location to put all the money they were already stealing. I was making it easier for them to commit their crimes so that the evidence would be undeniable and concentrated. "Vivian, that's incredibly generous," Silas said, his voice thick with suppressed excitement. "It's exactly what the company needs to modernize. I can start the paperwork for the Ethelgard Holding Group this afternoon." "I knew you'd be supportive," I smiled. "I've already prepared the initial authorization forms. You just need to sign off as the COO to bypass the board's standard 3-month audit." I slid a folder across the table. Hidden within the 50 pages of standard corporate jargon were 3 specific clauses. One linked the Ethelgard accounts directly to a private monitoring software I had installed at my atelier. The second stipulated that any funds moved into Ethelgard were considered a personal loan from my private estate, not the company. And the third, the most important one, stated that in the event of any irregularities, the lead officers would be personally and criminally liable, waiving all corporate indemnity. Silas, so eager to secure the $10 million, flipped to the back and signed with a flourish. He didn't read the fine print. He never did when he thought he was winning. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the doting mentor. I sat with Alara and looked at her designs, which were nothing more than cheap imitations of my early work. I praised her vision while secretly ensuring that every fabric supplier she contacted was actually a shell company owned by my private auditor, Kaylin. Every dollar they thought they were funneling into their secret Singapore account was actually being redirected into an escrow account I controlled. They were effectively stealing from me and giving it right back to me, all while creating a digital trail of fraud that would stand up in any court of law. One night I returned to the atelier late to find Silas in my private vault. He was holding my master pattern book, the collection of hand-drawn templates that define the Vespera silhouette. He didn't see me in the doorway. He was taking photos of the pages with his phone. The betrayal hit me again, a cold wave in my chest. He wasn't just taking my money, he was taking my soul, the very geometry of my talent. "Looking for something, Silas?" I asked, stepping into the light. He jumped, nearly dropping his phone. "Vivian, I was just looking for the archive sketches for the Ethelgard inspiration. I didn't want to wake you." "The past is a dangerous place to linger, Silas," I said, walking over to him. I took the book from his hands gently. "You should focus on the future. The Ethelgard launch party is only a week away. We've invited everyone, the press, the investors, even the Federal Trade Observers. It's going to be a night that no one in this city will ever forget." "I'm sure it will be," he said, regaining his composure and flashing that charming smile that used to make me feel safe. As he walked out, I looked at the page he had been photographing. It was a design for a wedding gown I had made for a young bride years ago. It represented hope. I closed the book and locked the vault. The stage was set. The bait had been taken. Now all that was left was to let the curtain rise and watch them realize that in the house of Vespera, I wasn't just the designer, I was the one who controlled the exit. The night of the Ethelgard launch was a spectacle of artificial brilliance. We had rented a glass-walled atrium overlooking the city skyline, a venue that felt as transparent as the lies my husband and sister were telling. The air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the nervous energy of the city's elite. Designers, influencers, and high-stakes investors mingled, sipping champagne, all waiting to see the new era of fashion that Silas and Ilara had promised. I stood in the corner of the VIP lounge, dressed in a gown of charcoal gray silk. It was understated, almost invisible compared to the shimmering, gold-sequined monstrosity Lara was wearing. She was flitting from guest to guest, her laughter a bit too loud, her eyes darting toward the entrance. She looked like a woman who had already won the lottery. "You look remarkably calm tonight, Vivian," Silas said, appearing at my elbow. He was wearing his tuxedo with a new level of arrogance, his chest puffed out like a man who had finally escaped a shadow. "Most designers would be a nervous wreck before a launch of this scale." "I'm not nervous, Silas," I replied, taking a slow sip of my water. "I'm focused. There's a difference. Once the patterns are cut, there's no point in worrying. The outcome is already woven into the fabric." "Well, tonight is about the future," he whispered, leaning closer. "After the presentation, I have some business matters we need to discuss about our roles in the company. I think it's time for a more formal separation of duties." "I couldn't agree more," I said, offering him a thin, enigmatic smile. "Tonight, everything will be made very clear." The lights dimmed, and the music, a heavy pulsing beat, began to echo through the atrium. Silas stepped onto the runway, a microphone in his hand. He looked every bit the powerful mogul. Behind him, a massive high-definition screen stood ready to broadcast the Ethelgard vision to the world. "Ladies and gentlemen," Silas began, his voice booming with a confidence that turned my stomach. "For 25 years, Vespera Couture has represented the pinnacle of tradition, but tradition can sometimes become a cage. Tonight, we break free. I am proud to introduce my partner and the creative visionary of the future, Ilara. Together, we present Ethelgard Luxury." The crowd cheered. Ilara stepped onto the stage, beaming, waving to the cameras. She looked toward the tech booth, giving a sharp nod. This was the moment they had planned to unveil their secret branding, the one they had funded with my stolen millions. But the screen didn't show the Ethelgard logo. Instead, a series of high-resolution documents appeared. First, it was the ledger from the Singapore account, highlighted in red to show the direct flow of funds from Vespera's operational budget. Then, a voice began to play over the speakers. It wasn't music, it was the recording I had captured in Silas's study the night I returned from Italy. "She's 54, Ilara. Her mind is always in the clouds. By the time the winter gala rolls around, we'll have funneled enough to launch Ilara Gold and leave this aging house to its creditors." The atrium went deathly silent. The only sound was the heavy breathing of the 200 people in the room and the static-filled playback of my husband's betrayal. Silas froze, the microphone trembling in his hand. Ilara's face went from a triumphant gold to a sickly pale white. But I wasn't finished. The screen flickered again. Now it showed the Ethelgard Incorporation papers. Beneath the signatures of Silas and Ilara, a large red stamp appeared. Assets seized. Fraud investigation pending. I stepped out from the shadows and walked slowly toward the stage. Every camera in the room turned toward me. The flashing lights were blinding, but I didn't blink. I climbed the stairs and stood between the two people who had tried to destroy me. The thing about being a master tailor is you spend your life looking for the flaws. You look for the weak seams, the hidden tears, the structural failures. Silas, you thought my age made me blind. Ilara, you thought my love made me weak. I turned to look at the crowd, then back at them. You didn't build a new brand. You built a paper trail. Every dollar you moved, every contract you forged was done under the watchful eye of a private audit. You haven't launched a company tonight. You've launched a criminal record. At that moment, 4 men in suits, real authorities from the Financial Crimes Division, stepped onto the runway. The golden bait had done its job. They hadn't just stolen from me. They had committed federal wire fraud under the very structure I had laid out for them. Silas tried to speak, to offer one last lie, but no sound came out. Ilara began to sob, the gold sequins on her dress shaking as she realized that the sister she had mocked was the one who had just closed the door on her world. The roller coaster had reached the drop, and I was the only one standing on solid ground. The aftermath of the gala was not the elegant transition Silas and Ilara had envisioned. It was a clinical, cold dismantling. As the authorities led them away through the service exit to avoid the frenzied paparazzi, the atrium transformed from a palace of luxury into the scene of a public downfall. The guests lingered in stunned clusters. Their whispers sounded like the rustle of dead leaves. I didn't stay to hear them. I walked back to my atelier, the only place where the world still made sense. An hour later, I was sitting in my dark office when the phone rang. It was Kalen, my auditor. His voice was weary but triumphant. "It's done, Vivian. Silas and Ilara are being processed at the Central Precinct. Because Silas signed those indemnity waivers you hid in the Ethelgard contracts, he has no corporate shield. The bank has already initiated the recovery of the redirected funds. You'll have the full $10 million back in the Vespera accounts by Monday morning." "And the board?" I asked, my eyes fixed on a mannequin dressed in a half-finished lace gown. "They're terrified," Kalen admitted. "They realize that if you could manage the exit of the COO and the head of PR so effortlessly, no one is safe. They've scheduled an emergency meeting for tomorrow at 8 a.m. They're not coming to fire you, Vivian. They're coming to beg you to stay." The next morning, I arrived at the official center before the sun was fully up. I had a right to see them, not as a wife or a sister, but as the woman who held the keys to their future. The visiting room smelled of stale coffee and heavy silence. When Silas was brought out, he looked decades older. His tuxedo was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and the charm that had been his greatest weapon was gone. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and a lingering toxic resentment. "You think you've won, Vivian?" He spat, his voice raspy. "You've dragged the family name through the mud. The brand is compromised now. No one will want to wear Vespera after this scandal." "The brand isn't compromised, Silas. You were," I replied, my voice calm and low. "Vespera survived for 25 years because of my hands, not your spreadsheets. The industry doesn't care about a disgraced officer. They care about the next collection, and I've already decided that the next collection will be dedicated to transparency. Every stitch will be visible. Every seam will be exposed. It will be the most honest work I've ever done." He let out a harsh laugh. "And Ilara? She's a child, Vivian, your own flesh and blood. Are you really going to let her face this alone?" "I didn't put her here, Silas. Her greed did. I offered her a seat at the table, and she tried to poison the cook." I stood up, smoothing the front of my coat. "I've instructed my lawyers to cooperate with the officials. If she tells the truth about the missing accounts, she might get a lighter outcome, but she will never step foot in my house or my company again. I moved to the next booth to see Alara. She was a different kind of wreck. She wasn't angry, she was hollow. When she saw me, she didn't scream. She just wept, her forehead pressed against the cold glass. "Vivian, please," she whispered. "I'm sorry. He told me it was the only way to be like you. He said you were holding me back because you were jealous of my youth." Jealous? I felt a flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished by the memory of her laughter in the study. "Alara, I spent 20 years trying to give you the world so you didn't have to fight for it. But you didn't want the world. You wanted my world. You forgot that youth is a fleeting season, but character is the garment that lasts forever." "Are you going to help me?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for the sisterly love she had so casually discarded. "I am helping you," I said firmly. "I am letting you face the consequences of your actions. It's the first real lesson I've ever given you. Learn it well, because it's the only inheritance you have left." I walked out of the building and into the brisk morning air. The headlines on the newsstands were already screaming about the Vespera betrayal, but as I looked at my hands, the hands of a woman who had built an empire and defended it, I realized I wasn't tired. For the first time in years, the patterns in my head were clear. The roller coaster had reached the bottom, and the debris was being cleared away. Now it was time to rebuild the tracks on a foundation that couldn't be shaken. The boardroom of Vespera Couture was colder than I remembered. 12 members of the board sat around the glass table, their faces etched with a mixture of concern and nervous calculation. These were individuals who had profited from my work for decades, yet the moment Silas whispered the word obsolete, many of them had been ready to look the other way. I walked in 3 minutes late. I didn't carry a briefcase or a laptop. I carried a single bolt of raw, unbleached linen. I dropped it on the center of the table with a heavy thud. "This is where we begin," I said, not bothering to sit. "Vivian, the situation is everywhere," one of the senior investors began, his voice trembling. "The reputation of the brand is under scrutiny. The luxury retailers are pausing their orders. We need a massive PR campaign to distance ourselves from Silas. We need a young, fresh face to distract the public." I leaned over the table, my eyes locking onto his. "We don't need a distraction. We need the truth. Silas and Ilara were the elements that were compromising this company from within. I have removed them. This company is built on the strength of the craftsmanship, not the vanity of a face." I unrolled the linen across the table. "I am launching the core collection. No dyes, no hidden zippers, no lace to cover the mistakes. It will be a study in perfect construction. We will invite the press into the atelier to watch the process. We will show them that while the leadership was fractured, the work remained unbroken." "And Silas's claims?" a woman at the far end asked. "He's telling his legal team you were aware of the account movements." "Let him tell his stories to the officials. I have provided all financial records and, more importantly, the digital logs of the Ethelberg project. Every movement Silas made was documented by a system he didn't know existed. I am not a person of secrets. I am a person of standards." By the end of the hour, the board was silent. They realized that the aging woman they thought they could replace was the only thing standing between them and total collapse. The following months were an intense labor. I received word that Silas, faced with the undeniable evidence, had accepted the legal consequences of his actions. He was held accountable for his financial misconduct and would be away for a long time. Ilara's path was different. Because she had eventually cooperated, she was given a chance to repay her debt to society through community service in a textile facility. The most difficult moment came when her representative called me. "She has lost everything, Vivian. She's asking if you could support her for a few months." I looked out the window at the city. "No," I said firmly. She wanted to be a visionary who didn't need the past. Let her build her own future. If she wants a roof over her head, she can learn to work for a living, just as I did. The morning of the core collection debut arrived with a clarity that only comes after a storm. I had transformed the main atelier into a living museum of process. There was no upbeat music or flashy lights. There were only the sounds of rhythmic work and the smell of high-quality wool. As the guests filtered into the room, they didn't see a typical show. They saw my team, the people Silas and Alara had overlooked, working at their stations. On 12 pedestals stood the collection. They were garments of profound honesty. Every seam was visible, turning the structure of the dress into its most beautiful feature. Fashion has spent a century teaching us how to hide, I told the crowd. Vespera is no longer about the mask, it is about the foundation. The response was overwhelming. We didn't just reclaim our status, we redefined it. I had reclaimed my name. Weeks later, I sat in my office and looked at 2 letters. One was from the facility where Silas was being held. I didn't open it. I knew it was filled with excuses. I sent it to the shredder, watching his words turn into dust. The second was a report on Alara. She was working on the sorting floor of the textile plant, separating fabric for 10 hours a day. It was unglamorous work. She was finally learning the value of the materials she had once taken for granted. I decided to visit her. When I arrived, I saw her through the security fence. She was wearing a heavy apron, her face smudged with dust. "I'm not here to take you back, Alara," I said as she approached. "I know," she whispered. "I'm learning how to sew, Vivian. One of the workers here is teaching me. It's harder than I thought." "It's the hardest thing to do correctly," I replied. I reached into my bag and passed a small professional sewing kit through the fence. "If you finish your service and truly learn the craft, come to the back door of the atelier. You won't be an executive, you'll be an apprentice. You'll start with the scraps." Alara took the kit, her fingers tracing the case. "Thank you, Vivian." I walked back to my car. I am 54 years old. I have lost the family I thought I knew, but I have found the strength I always had. My life is no longer a shimmering design made to impress. It is a strong, simple garment built to last. The seams are visible, the truth is out, and finally I am at peace.